Sup guys, today I'm going to give you a more concrete understanding of where Unzen's damage stands in relation to some of the other Vanguard DPS ships in the game. This video is going to contain two things that are not very popular with the widespread audience, and they are statistics and nuance. If you're one of those people who detest such things, you have been warned. One of these days, I think I'll just post some raw data without any of my personal analysis and see who can give the best interpretation of the results. I think it will be an interesting experiment. So, my Unzen has just reached level 120, 200 affection with maxed skills, so I will be doing a head-to-head comparison between her and Drake, since I will most likely never put any more resources into Drake. Before I begin, I'm expecting her to just completely crush Drake, but since she has oath bonuses whereas Drake does not, if the results are extremely close, then I will consider things to be in Drake's favor. I conducted these tests in the easy difficulty of the Helena challenge mode, since it's freely repeatable, but it comes with a few caveats, most of which are in favor of Drake. For one, fights exceed 4 minutes, so Unzen's double preload torpedoes lose most of their value. Additionally, it being a light armor enemy means that Unzen's torpedoes will be at their least effective. Another potential issue is the mechanics of the fight itself, which could skew results by granting Helena either firepower or torpedo-specific damage reduction. To circumvent that, I timed my carriers to always strike when she gets her damage reduction, which means she always ends up with aviation damage reduction for the entire fight and will not affect the Vanguard in any way. As you can see here, the very first strike caused her to apply the aviation damage reduction, and then here, the last airstrike also granted her aviation damage reduction, although it's starting to run a bit late. After a couple runs, I further adjusted the airstrike timings to make them a bit more consistent. In terms of the equipment, I started with just plus 10 Drake guns and quad mag torpedoes on both as a baseline, as well as defensive auxiliary. This is also Drake favored as she doesn't gain much out of using another gun. As you can see in the wiki DPS table, since Drake changes the ammo mod of her gun, by going from the Drake gun to the Unzen gun, you're going from this DPS number here to this DPS here, which is a downgrade. Taking the ballistics of the two guns into consideration though, it should likely be an upgrade. On the other hand, for Unzen against a light armor enemy, you're looking at going from this DPS of the Drake gun to this DPS of the Unzen gun. So not only is it an upgrade in ballistics, but also significant in terms of raw DPS. We should also note that the enemy does not have any shields, and if it did, then Drake's performance will nosedive much more relative to Unzen's. Apart from the gun, Unzen obviously has better torpedoes, so using plus 13 torpedoes will benefit her more. And that is not to mention Oxytorps. A couple of intangibles for Drake though is that she is a bit tankier, although often not enough to main tank, and that she has a special burn, but I don't think it adds a significant amount to her overall DPS. If the results are close, we can just say that Drake wins out due to her burns. So, getting into the results of the base test, we can see that even with pretty much everything skewed toward Drake, the gap is quite large. The reason I only gathered a sample size of 5 is because the duration of the fight significantly reduces the variance of each run. As previously mentioned, there are a lot of factors that will further increase this gap. I will list some of them again. Shielded enemies, multiple enemies leading to higher torpedo hit rates, shorter fights favoring Unzen's preload, medium or heavy armor enemies, more upgrades and oxygen torpedoes, and the list just goes on and on. Also, despite so much of her damage coming by way of torpedoes, you can clearly see that her damage is not any less consistent than Drake's. This is due to the fact that quad mag torpedoes with no spread reduction averages out to around 50% hit rate, and it almost always reaches that number because of the length of the fight. In the next set of tests, I wanted to gather some evidence to back up my claim that the Unzen gun will perform better than the Drake gun despite its lower raw DPS. Since I am going to be using stronger equipment, the finish times of the fights won't be the same, so I will have to gather DPS numbers in order to compare the results across the two tests. Taking Drake's DPS with plus 10 equipment, we know that the ceiling of her DPS with plus 13 versions of the same equipment will be 18%, since the equipments do not affect her barrage damage. If we switch to the Unzen gun and her DPS increase exceeds 18%, then it will definitively be an upgrade over the Drake gun. Looking at the results, we see an increase of about 17% in DPS. For comparison, we can also look at how Plymouth's DPS increased with the same equipment, but both at plus 13 rather than plus 10. The increase is only about 9% due to a significant part of her damage coming from barrages. Since they are different ships, this doesn't tell us much about Drake. The damage increase did not exceed 18%, so we cannot be absolutely certain that it is an upgrade, but I'm fairly confident that it is. Unfortunately, I do not have a plus 13 Drake gun to go head-to-head with a Unzen gun on Drake, and I don't plan to make one either. If you're interested in more concrete results in regards to this question, then you should conduct your own tests on it. In the last set of tests, I gave both Unzen and Plymouth the highest DPS loadouts possible. We can see that Unzen's damage is not too far behind Plymouth's when adjusted for level advantage, but there is still a sizable difference and Unzen lacks the buff that Plymouth provides. Again, some things to consider are the fact that light armor is likely Unzen's worst armor type as opposed to Plymouth's best, and the power of her double preload is diminished in this longer fight, and the fact that Helena moves around quite a bit, which is worse for heavy cruiser guns compared to light cruiser guns, and Plymouth's damage can be hindered by enemy shields. But in any case, looking back at the advantage she has over Drake, I'm confident that her damage output will also be higher than that of Hindenburg's, especially when you consider Hindenburg will need 3 to 4 very difficult to obtain guns at plus 13 in order to specialize against an armor type, making Unzen both the strongest and most accessible heavy cruiser in the game. And that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.